Evening. I want to say how much I really appreciate the emphasis of this VBS. Godly women. How important are godly women to the followers or the work of God? I've never been a part of a church that didn't have so much of its success fueled by good and godly women. One of the false accusations that's leveled against the Bible sometimes is that it's chauvinistic and that it holds women down, it suppresses women. Certainly God has a right to say what roles we fulfill in His plan, but there is nothing in the Bible that is denigrating to women. As a matter of fact, do a little research sometime and go back and compare the way that a lot of ancient cultures treated women and contrast that with the way Jesus treated women. Contrast that with the way that we see women depicted in places like we saw with Deborah and Abigail, and I'm thrilled to be able to learn from those messages, and I'm thankful for the speakers who brought those to us. But do not for one moment think that the Bible is somehow denigrating to women. It elevates women and spotlights them and certainly endorses their activity in a way that no other culture or book ever has. I'm so thankful for this wall as you walk out this door here. There on the left-hand side, all these posters of godly women from the Word of God, and then look on the right-hand side, and so many names of so many godly women that are depicted there, some of whom have been a vital part of this work here over the years, who have now gone on to their reward, and some of who are still here working and carrying on the work. So thank God, and I mean that reverently, thank God for godly women. Thank God. Now tonight we're privileged to investigate one of those godly women by the name of Esther. Now the book of Esther is an interesting book. It's only 167 verses long. Its setting is interesting. We're going to talk about that in a moment. It's never quoted in the New Testament. It's not the only book of the Old Testament that's not directly quoted or alluded to in the New Testament, but it's not, and sometimes people think that's a slight against it. It's by no means a slight against it. It's still a part of the biblical canon of Scripture. It belongs in the Bible and was recognized as a biblical book. Its background is during the reign of one by the name of Ahasuerus, or Xerxes the First, as he's also known. In fact, as you think about this Ahasuerus, he is king during the book of Esther, and he reigned from 486 to 465 BC. But I want you to know that this is not the same Ahasuerus that's mentioned in Daniel chapter 9 and verse 1. If I say Caesar, you don't know immediately which Caesar I might be talking about. If I say Pharaoh, you don't know immediately which Pharaoh I might be talking about. And this term Ahasuerus seemed to have been maybe a dynastic title that was used to refer not just to someone's name, but to their role, their function, just like a Caesar or just like a Pharaoh. So the one that we're studying about is Xerxes. And Xerxes reigned from India to Ethiopia. As a matter of fact, if you'll look on the map that you'll see there up on the screen, I wanted to make sure that it was up there, and 127 provinces. If you look at the very first verse of the book of Esther and notice the statement that is made about this king and the domain of his kingdom. Notice in verse 1, it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this is the same one that reigned from India even unto Ethiopia. That's over 127 provinces. We're talking 2.1 million miles, square miles, 2.1 million square miles if you're going by the territory that's involved. And so this is a very, very powerful man, very, very powerful kingdom. And this is set in the time, notice verse number 3, in the 3rd year of his reign. So that would be 483 BC. In 483 BC, this king makes a feast for all of the nobles and princes of all of these provinces. When you talk about a party, according to verse number 4, he showed off the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. 6-month party, just to show off how great the kingdom of Persia was. And it was only about 3 years later, by the way, that he tried to invade Greece and did not come back successfully. And so he wasn't quite as great as he thought he was, but he was certainly trying to show off for those who were interested in seeing his greatness and the excellency of his kingdom. And then at the end of that 6-month feast, it's time for another feast. This one is for everyone. In fact, you'll notice there in verse 5, when these days were expired, the king made a feast to all the people that were present in Shushan, the palace. Shushan is also known as Susa, S-U-S-A. It was one of 4 capital cities in Persia that the king liked to go to. And this is one certainly where you could find a lot of riches and luxury. And so here we read about that there in verse number 5, the court of the garden of the king's palace and all this white, green, blue hangings. It's beautifully decorated. And you've got beds made out of gold and silver and pavement of red, blue, white, black marble. And they're drinking out of vessels of gold. I don't know about you, but I don't have any gold drinking vessels in my house. Maybe some red Solo cups and some things from Nukes, you know, and those free souvenir cups. I've got some of those. And we've got some nicer glasses when the company comes, you know. But most of us don't drink out of gold drinking vessels. These individuals were drinking out of these drinking vessels, and the wine was flowing freely, according to verse number 7. In fact, it mentions royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. And this drinking was according to the law, no one compelled. For so had the king appointed to all the officers of the house, they should do every man according to his pleasure. Well, Vashti made a feast for the women, and we're told about it in verse number 9. This feast was for the women in the royal house. Now, verse 10, on the 7th day, when the king was certainly under the influence of the wine he'd been drinking, he commands 7 of his attendants, his chamberlains. You go get Vashti and you bring her here to show off her beauty to all of these drunken men. Now, that alone would have been enough for a woman not to want to come and parade herself in front of a room full of drunken men. Now, for what it's worth, Josephus claims that when he asked for her to come, look at the way the language is there in the text, in verse 11, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princess her beauty, for she was fair to look on. Josephus claims that what the king was demanding is that Vashti show up wearing nothing but the crown. If that is the case, if Josephus is correct in that assessment, you can see in very strong ways why Vashti would not want to come and parade herself in such fashion before a group of drunken men. And so she steadfastly refuses to come. Now, what does this have to do with Esther? Well, bottom line is that when she refused to parade herself before this room full of drunken men, Xerxes is absolutely furious, and his wise men counseled him to dismiss her and replace her. And they send letters out. Look at verse 22. He sent letters into all the king's provinces, all 127 of them, according to the writing thereof, to let people know that there was going to be, no longer would Vashti be allowed to come into his presence. Now, isn't this ironic? Look at verse 19. What was this decree? And remember, the decrees of the Persians were such that could not be altered. That's important for later on in our story. And when we say story, we mean his story. It's an actual event. It actually happened. It's not just some make-believe thing. But you'll notice, what was the decree? That Vashti come no more before king. Now, she had not come before him when he'd commanded her to. Now he's saying, I command you not to come before me. And so this decree goes out, and some period of time goes by, and his wrath subsides. And someone says, hey, you know what? We need a new queen. And so what we propose, look at verse 2, let there be, chapter 2 now, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. Let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom. Their job is to go out and find the most beautiful women in those provinces, and then to bring the most beautiful women to the finale, to be a part of the final group that will be brought to Shushan the palace, to the house of the women. And then a man by the name of Haggai will be the chamberlain, the keeper of the women, and he'll make sure they have their beauty products. And let the maiden, verse 4, which pleases the king, be queen instead of Vashti. What do you think about that, king? He says, I like it. Let's do it. And that's exactly what we're about to see happen. As we get ready for that to happen, I want you to meet Mordecai, or revisit Mordecai, as most of us would do. Who is he? According to chapter 2 and verse 5, he was a Jew. He had royal ancestry. As a matter of fact, it mentions that he is the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Who was the first king of Israel? And he was the son of, and he was a member of the tribe of Benjamin. So you've got Mordecai here years later, who is carrying on that royal blood in him. And he is there in captivity. He'd been, according to verse 6, carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, when Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And so, as a young boy, he'd been carried into captivity. And then we're told that he is the one who brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter. Now, Hadassah is her Hebrew name. Esther is her Persian name. And we're going to talk about her more in just a moment. But her Hebrew name was Hadassah. Esther is the daughter of a man by the name of Abihail. As a matter of fact, this is stated in chapter 2 and verse 15. And it's also stated in chapter 9:29. She's the daughter of Abihail. And then you'll note her parents apparently had been taken out of the picture early on in her life, so much so that Mordecai had to raise her as his own daughter, because verse 7 of the Esther chapter 2 says she had neither father nor mother, meaning she didn't have them anymore. And so Mordecai, her cousin, her older cousin, had to be the one to raise her. Now, we're told early on that she was a very attractive young lady. As a matter of fact, verse 7 mentions that she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful. That's just stood out about her. She was very attractive in a physical sense. But I want to hurry and notice that she had an inner beauty that is actually indicated in the word used in verse 9. Look at it with me if you will. And the maiden pleased him. This is referencing Haggai, the one who's in charge of the women. Let me go back and read verse 8 to prepare us for this. The king's commandment and decree is now gone out. These women start being gathered to Shushan the palace, and Haggai is the one in charge of the women. Now, there's a lot of women. For what it's worth, Josephus claims there were 400 women that made the finals, and that she is one of the 400. The text in Esther doesn't tell us how many. We just know that it was from every province, and so there had to have been quite a few women. You'll note that what does the Bible say about her interaction with the man that's in charge of all of these women and making sure they have their beauty needs met? This verse 9 says, the maiden pleased him, Haggai. She obtained kindness of him. He speedily gave her things for purification, which such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens to attend to her. And out of the king's house, he preferred her, and her maids actually gave them the best place in the house of the women. Now tell me why he picked her. Is she just picked on the basis of her physical beauty alone? If you look at the word, the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him. In the original language, the idea is one of her pleasing disposition. Her nature was such that she was friendly and agreeable, and someone that one enjoyed being around. Now, what happened to her as a consequence of being so good-natured and agreeable? She had an inner beauty. Have you met people that absolutely were very, very attractive or handsome, as the case may be, but whose spirit and attitude was as ugly could be, right? We've seen that. Some people are good-looking and they know it, and they act like it, and they want you to act like they are, and if you don't give them proper attention in that department, they're going to remind you of how good looking they really are. I'm telling you, Esther's not that kind of person. Even though she's been blessed with physical beauty, that's not what makes her beautiful alone. It is not at all, because she had a pleasing disposition that led to her being given a place of prominence. Now, does this remind you of someone that was brought into a slavery type situation where he was going to be forced to serve, and he ended up being made someone that was in charge of the whole household and was completely trusted? And it kept saying the reason this happened is that God was with him, God was with him, God was with him. Who are we talking about? Joseph. You remember how Joseph seemed to be constantly ending up in good positions. Even when he was in prison, he ended up being led to a position that would be greater than he ever imagined being in Egypt. God was taking care of his people. He's taking care of Esther, and you'll notice here that she is given the best place in the house for the women. And so this inner beauty really stands out. Now, later on, when she has her time to come before the king, it's going to tell us there in verse number 15, in the last part of the verse, that middle part of the verse, she required nothing but what Haggai the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. She obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. She had a natural beauty that did not require an extreme makeover, and certainly her personality beautified her even more and made her even more attractive. Now, please note her humility. She's not just beautiful, she's humble. And those often don't go in the same universe, but she had a humility that's evident. Look at verse 10. Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred. Why not? What's the text say is the reason why she didn't reveal her nationality? Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. Does she say, Mordecai, I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but I'm one of the final 400, and I think you probably need to back down a notch or two. I pretty much have my destiny set for me. I'm obviously going places. The king summoned me to be a part of his harem, and that makes me special, and I don't have to listen to you anymore because I'm in an elevated position now. No, that's not her attitude. She had been charged by Mordecai not to reveal her nationality, her race at this point, and she's humbly submissive to Mordecai's instructions. Now, is this something that just started recently? Someone read, if you will, please, verse number 20. What does verse 20 tell us about her and how long this humility had been manifested by her? Yeah, thank you. Notice that last part. She hadn't revealed her kindred nor her people because Mordecai had charged her not to. And she did the commandment of Mordecai, but notice this qualifying phrase, like as when she was brought up with him. This is the way she has always treated him, with this respect that says, I will listen to your instructions. Her new position as queen is not going to change her humble disposition. As a matter of fact, you'll notice there in verse number 15. Now, when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go into the king, she required nothing. We already read that. Look at verse 16. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, and we're now in the 7th year of his reign. So this is 4 years after this whole book starts. 4 years after the book starts is how long we've gone into the story here. It's a compressed account. 4 years have transpired since chapter 1 and now here in chapter 2 and verse 16. And the king has made his selection. He's loved Esther above all the women. She obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. He set the royal crown upon her head, made her queen instead of Vashti. And even says, Esther, you're going to get a feast of your own. It's going to be Esther's feast. Then the king made a great feast to all his princes and his servants, and he called it Esther's feast. And he made a release to the province, gave gifts. In other words, it was a tax holiday. He basically said, in celebration of the new queen, it's a tax holiday. And so it was a time for them to really enjoy a wonderful celebration. We've got a new queen. Even in England today, when a new queen is appointed, it makes the news for a day or two, doesn't it? It's certainly something that goes through the cycle. Imagine the significance of this back then to the Persian culture, to have a new queen. And Esther is now the queen. But look at verse 20. She still's not showing her kindred nor her people, because why? Mordecai had charged her. Now she could say, not only I'm one of the final 400 or however many there were, she could say, I am the queen now, Mordecai. I don't have to listen to you anymore. In fact, you need to start listening to me. But that's not going to be her attitude at all. And that's really impressive about her. Now, please observe her leadership. Her leadership here in chapter 2:21. This is one of the most significant events in the book, but we don't know it when you're reading at this point how significant this event's going to be. Mordecai is there at the king's gate, and two of the king's attendants or officials, chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, they're angry. Something apparently has upset them with the king. And what are they wanting to do? And Mordecai overhears them plotting it. They want to lay hand on the king. And the thing is known to Mordecai. He tells Esther the queen. Now, she then certifies the king in Mordecai's name, makes sure that this gets investigated. When inquisition was made of the matter, verse 23, it was found out they were guilty. This wasn't just hearsay. Therefore, they were both hanged on a tree. And note this part. It was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. In other words, this historic bit of information is going to be put in the historical records, and keep that in mind for a little bit later on. She makes sure this important information gets reported and duly documented, and it's a good thing she did. It's going to play a major part in what happens later. Now, when we get to chapter 4, we'll see more about why Esther is such a great leader. I want to show you in chapter 3 what happens now. We're introduced to the arch villain of the whole book. It's Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite. Now this is 550 years after 1 Samuel 15. 550 years after 1 Samuel 15. What happened in 1 Samuel 15? What didn't happen in 1 Samuel 15 is maybe a better way to ask it. Saul spared at first Agag, the king, and spared the best of the sheep, the oxen, and apparently there were other Agagites who were not killed on that occasion, who had gotten away, and some of their descendants were still alive, and Haman is one of them. And the Bible says that the king Xerxes is advancing Haman. He's an up-and-comer. I mean, he is being promoted right and left, and his seat is, according to verse 1, set above all the princes that were with him. And all the king's servants reverence him because why? Well, the king had commanded everyone to do that. But Mordecai doesn't bow. He doesn't show him reverence. Why not? What does Mordecai have as his background? He's a Jew, right? What does the law of Moses say, under which Mordecai certainly believed himself to be? What did the law of Moses say? You don't bow down to any graven image. You don't bow down to things that are not God. You don't bow down. You show honor and reverence to God and not to a man. Mordecai will not bow to Haman. And the king's servants in the king's gate are all over Mordecai about this. Why do you transgress the king's commandment? The king has commanded us to bow. Now, truly, we ought to obey God, what? Rather than men. And that was true then as much as it is now. They talked to him about this every day, according to verse 4. But he wouldn't listen, and he wouldn't bow. And then, they tell Haman. They tattle on Mordecai. Haman, do you know what Mordecai is? He's not bowing. Now, this is interesting. The man who had told Esther, don't you dare say that you're a Jew, has decided that he has the liberty to make that declaration known. What does the last part of verse 4 tell us that that Mordecai had done with these individuals there at the gate? He told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, now he's on the lookout for, you're not bowing. You're not showing me reverence. Haman is full of wrath. He thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Now you talk about a window into someone's heart. This man, one man, won't bow to me. My solution, don't kill just that one man and punish him. No, I want his entire race exterminated. Kill them all. Anyone that has his kind of blood flowing through their veins needs to be slaughtered. Kill them all. That's exactly what we're about to see him trying to engineer here in Esther chapter 3. You'll see that it was the first month. Verse 6, look at the middle of verse 6. He sought to destroy all the Jews throughout the whole kingdom, all 127 provinces, anyone that were connected to Mordecai, the people of Mordecai. Now look at verse 7. Again, time compression. in the first month, that's the month Nisan, in the 12th year. This is 5 years later than chapter 2. We're 5 years later than chapter 2 and 9 years later than when we first started the book. And so here we see they're casting pur, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day, from month to month, to the 12th month, the month Adar. And Haman says, King, can I talk to you about something? There is a certain people. They are scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are diverse from all people. They don't keep the king's law. It's really not in your best interest to allow them to exist. Don't suffer them. Don't allow them to exist. Now notice this. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. I'll pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business to bring it into the king's treasuries. And so we're talking about a whopping sum of money back then. Some guesstimates have been over $5 million. Some have said even more than that. But this is 375 tons of silver. That's about 70% of the annual receipts that they would have. And he says, I'll pay all of that to get this job done. What do you think about it? The king takes his ring from his hand. Now, by the way, does the king know at this point in time that when he says yes to this, that he's signing the death warrant for Esther, the queen? Does he know that yet? No. He doesn't know that. He just knows Haman's one of my high-ranking officials, and he has a request. And if these people are out there rebelling and showing this kind of rebellious attitude to my laws, then yeah, they need to be wiped out. So he basically hands his ring over to Haman in verse number 10. And notice how the scripture describes him here. The Agagite, the Jews, what? Let me ask you, is there any anti-Semitism making the news in our current culture today? Yes or no? Now, am I promoting the Jews because I have some belief that they're going to receive the promised land at the end of time and God still owes them some things? No, I'm not saying that as I stand here, I think the Jews are going to receive any special blessings during 1,000-year reign on earth. The Bible doesn't teach that. But they're human beings, are they not? They're still human beings. Even though their race is certainly involved in the crucifixion of Christ, the Romans were a part of that. The sins of all men, Jew and Gentile, we're all guilty before God. And which one of us are responsible for the crucifixion of Christ? All of us who are sinners. So the Jews, do we have some axe to grind against them because of their participation in the crucifixion of Christ? And no, we're not saying that was a good thing, but we're not saying that we're going to hold it against modern day Jews who had nothing to do with that. So why would we want to be an anti-Semite today? But look, let me ask you this question. Is anti-Semitism some new thing? There is a hatred on the part of Haman for these Jews. Perhaps it dates all the way back to Agag and the Amalekites. I don't know. But he has a hatred that is definitely there. And Mordecai, the Jew. And so the Jew's enemy is Haman. The king's scribes, according to verse 12, are called on the 13th day of the first month, and they write down everything Haman commanded, and they send these letters out. And notice the legal language. If you like legal language, you're about to see some here in verse 13. The letters were sent by the posts into all the king's provinces, notice, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish. Now, isn't to kill enough? To destroy enough? Well, no, let's build in some language that allows no loopholes. To destroy, to kill, to cause to perish all Jews. How are we talking Young Jews who, yes. Old, yes. Little children, yes. Women in one day, yes. Now, what was the command with the Amalekites? Utterly destroy them. So what is Haman trying to do to the Jews now? Utterly destroy them. There's a difference between the two groups. It's a very, very sad thing to think that a cancer might be in your body that would necessitate the amputation of one of your limbs. We have my wife's twin sister's son, Caleb, had to have his leg amputated because of osteosarcoma a few years ago. And he's still surviving and actually doing well. Physically speaking, he's doing well. But they had to cut his leg off to keep him alive. That's drastic. God sometimes has to preserve societies, bring about things in the Old Testament that would preserve the Jewish seed line, that would preserve the societies. And that's exactly what happened with the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15. They were sinners, according to verse 19 of that chapter. And so here we see this wish on the part of Haman to utterly destroy all the Jews. And these letters go out in verse 15, and they FedEx them. They hasten them by the king's commandment. The decree is given in Shushan the palace. And what do the king and Haman sit down to do after sending out this decree to slaughter an entire race of people? Let's sit down and have a drink. And that's what they do. The city of Shushan is perplexed. They're like, what generated this? And that brings us to chapter 4. Mordecai perceives all that was done. He rents his clothes, puts on sackcloth with ashes, went out into the midst of the city, cried with a loud voice, a loud bitter cry, came even before the king's gate. You weren't allowed to go inside the king's gate in sackcloth. And so he came to as far as he could go, but he's wearing the sackcloth. And in every province, these letters start arriving, and people start reading what's going to happen about a year from what? We're all going to die? There was reaction. Yes, verse 3. Great mourning among the Jews, fasting, weeping, wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Now, Esther is about to find out what's happening. Esther's maids and her attendants come and say, here's what's happening. And then what's her reaction? Verse 4, exceedingly grieved. And then notice this about her. She is such an important person, and yet what's her first thought? Not about her. She hears about Mordecai, and he's wearing sackcloth, and what does she, as a selfless, humble person, try to do immediately? She wants to take away his sackcloth from him. In verse 4, she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai, to take away his sackcloth from him, but he wouldn't accept it. He's going to keep on mourning and praying and fasting. Now, I want you to, at this point, notice the leadership kick in Esther. She is going to start taking charge and commanding certain things to be done so she can get to the bottom of this. Watch verse 5. Then called Esther for Hatak, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he'd appointed to attend upon her. She delegates, gives him a commandment. You go tell Mordecai, I want to know what and why. That's you. Ask Mordecai what and why. So Hatak, verse 6, went forth to Mordecai. Verse 7, Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him. The sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries if we could destroy all these Jews. And he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan and said, show this to Esther. Declare it unto her. Charge her. Tell her she needs to go to the king and make supplication, make request before him for her people. Now it's time to tell who you are, Esther. Reveal your nationality. Hatak comes and tells Esther what Mordecai said. Now please notice Mordecai's request and Esther's reaction to it. In verse 11, she says, go back and tell Mordecai this. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know. It's known, everyone knows. Whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come to the king into the inner court who's not summoned or invited, who's not called, there's one law of his to put him to death. The only exception is if the king holds out what? The golden scepter, that he may live. But I haven't even been called by the king to come to the king for these 30 days. Which brings me to an observation I want to make. As much as Hollywood might try to make it otherwise, the book of Esther is not a love story between a king and one queen. It's not really a love story. I cannot imagine as a husband saying to my wife, well, okay, I've summoned you for now. Go away until I want you back in my life again. You just go somewhere and I'll let you know when you can come back in my presence. And that's not a loving relationship, king or not. She is not someone that's sleeping beside him each night in such a sweet and tender way as his beloved wife that he has such a close relationship with. There's no Song of Solomon type relationship here with his wife that we're reading about here. He liked her better than any other woman that was available to him, and he chose her, but he obviously doesn't want her to be in his life on a daily basis. He hasn't summoned or called for her in 30 days, and she doesn't even have the liberty to go into his presence anytime she wants to. Can you imagine husbands going home tonight and saying, look, I want you to buy a golden scepter at Walmart or off Amazon or wherever you can, and I'm going to hold it from my chair, and if you want to enter the room, stand there and wait until I hold it out. If I hold it out, you can come on in. If I don't, you're risking it. That's not love. This is not a love story like the movies want to make it. Not to that degree. He does have some affection for her, no doubt, but it's not the kind of husbands love your wives as Christ loved the church affection that we read about in Ephesians 5. And so here we see that she says, I haven't even been summoned in 30 days. So if I just get up and decide to go into his presence without his invitation, that could be the end of me. Know that. He could kill me. They told Mordecai what Esther had said. And then Mordecai sent this word back in verse 13. Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, and this next line, I think Mordecai does not get enough credit for it. It is one of the most faith-based statements in the entire Old Testament in my judgment. His conviction is not, Esther, you are the one and only hope to keep the Jewish race alive. He doesn't say that. In fact, he even says what? If you don't speak up, does he say we're all goners? What does he say? Enlargement and deliverance will arise to the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will be destroyed. Why does Mordecai believe that no matter what Esther does, the Jewish race will be preserved? Well, let me ask you, did God ever say the Jewish race would bring someone into this world that would bless the world and save the world from its sins? And that man would not just be a man, he would be God in the flesh, and he would come from what tribe? Genesis 49:10, the scepter shall not depart from Judah. If the Jews are wiped off the face of the planet as a result of Haman's decree, then there's no tribe of Judah there's no Messiah coming. The redemptive plan comes to a screeching halt. Mordecai has such conviction in God's promise that he says, Esther, if you don't do this, then somehow, some way, it will be done by God, but you won't survive. And then he goes on to ask this, though, even though there's no doubt that God will rescue us because God always keeps his promises, who knows, verse 14, whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Maybe the reason you're in the position you are in providentially is because you have influence to save the Jewish people. And maybe that's why you've been given this opportunity. Esther listens, bade them return Mordecai this answer. I want you to notice it in verse 16. Go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan and fast for me. This leads us to Esther's trust. What does Esther really believe? She believes that a group of Jews who are God's people gathered together and fasting, and no doubt by implication praying, where they often went together, can make a difference, can actually change circumstances. She trusted God's power to answer prayer and fasting. She said, get all the Jews present in Shushan and you fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. Now, let me ask you, does she have a humility? Yes. Her new position as queen does not give her the idea that, look, you all do the fasting, I'm the queen, I don't have to fast. She says what? I'm going to do this as well. I and my maidens will fast likewise. And then I'll go to the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. What a humility. Does she say, the world can't live without me? No. She says what? If I perish, I perish. If he kills me, I'll just die. What a courageous, selfless attitude. It's not about whatever it takes to keep myself alive, I'll do that even if it hurts others. No, her sacrificial spirit is, I'm willing to give my life to try to save the Jewish people. The one who would come through the Jewish people was willing to go to the cross and give his life to save all people, right? And that's something that's very special. Now notice her leadership. The one who had always listened humbly to Mordecai is now being listened to by Mordecai. Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. He's now taking charge from her, and he is listening to her respectfully. And we see now in chapter 5 her bravery. Her uninvited approach to the king is a bold act of bravery. This whole series has been called The Bold, the Beautiful, the Brave, something like that. Esther's all three of those. She's beautiful. We already know that. She is bold and she is brave on this occasion. She, especially in light of the fact that she has not been summoned in a month to be in the presence of the king, is going to take her chances. She puts on her royal apparel, verse 1 of chapter 5, stands in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house. The king sat on the royal throne, and he could see Esther the queen standing in the court. And this is when Hollywood would cut to a commercial. You'd see his finger twitch on the golden scepter, but you wouldn't know whether he was really going to hold it out or not until after the commercial. We don't have to wait for the end of a commercial. What does he do? He held out to Esther the golden scepter in his hand. She drew near. She touches the top of the scepter. Now notice Esther's wisdom as we start coming down the last part of this. Esther's wisdom. She knows better than to just blurt out immediately the thing that's on her mind. She wants to work up to it in a methodical, wise, calculated way. So the king sees her, he says, what do you want, Queen Esther? Verse 3, what wilt thou? What is thy request? It shall be given thee to half of the kingdom. And Esther answered, well, if it seemed good to the king, I'd like you and Haman to come to a banquet that I've prepared for him. And then the king said, cause Haman to make haste that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet Esther had prepared. And then while they're sitting there at the banquet, he says, Esther, what is your petition? It will be granted thee. What's your request? Even up to half the kingdom. Now she could tell him right there in front of Haman, but she's not going to do that just yet. She says, what I want is for you, and if I found favor with the king, verse 8, if it pleased the king, notice how your honor, she's speaking respectfully to the one in charge and authority, as we ought to do when we're faced with such. She says, what my humble request is, would you and Haman come to another banquet tomorrow? Haman leaves this meeting. I mean, he is walking on air. Look at verse 9. Joyful and glad, but when he saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai, but he refrained himself. And he gets home, and his wife, Zeresh, and their friends are having a dinner party. And have you ever been to a dinner party where someone is, like we're about to read in verse 11, Haman told them of the glory of his riches, the multitude of his children, all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and servants of the king. The topic of conversation at the dinner party is all about one narcissistic person named whom? It's all about me. And let me tell you this, let me tell you this, let me tell you this about me. And Haman says, also, in addition to what I've already told you, verse 12, Esther the queen didn't let anyone come to a banquet with the king except for me, and tomorrow I'm invited to go to that same banquet, another banquet, just us, just me, the king, and Esther. But you know what? All of this availeth me nothing as long as I see Mordecai the Jew. Notice, don't miss the prejudice. Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. And then said Zeresh's wife and all his friends, well, you just ought to have a gallows made about 75 foot tall and hang him on it. He thinks, you know what, that's a great idea. So he actually gave orders to make the gallows. And that night, chapter 6, the king can't sleep. Now, what is he going to do to make himself fall asleep? Someone bring the historical records and read them to me. Maybe that will make me fall asleep. Well, it just so happens the passage they happen to read. By the way, may I remind you, there are 12 years worth of historical records by now. By the time we get to this part of the story, that's a lot of historical records to read. It was found written, verse 2, Providence? Yeah. It was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, and that basically he'd exposed their assassination plot. The king wants to know, tell me what honor and dignity has been done to Mordecai for this? And they said, well, according to this, nothing's ever been done for him. And right then he heard someone in the court. Who's in the court? It's Haman. Now what does he come to do? He's come to ask the king for permission to do what? To hang Mordecai on the gallows. He walks in at the very moment the king has just realized Mordecai's never been rewarded for exposing the assassination plot. And Haman comes in, and Haman is asked by the king, Haman, what should I do for the man that I want to show so much honor to, that I delight to honor? What would you recommend I do to really promote a man and really make him look great in front of everyone? And Haman thinks, narcissist that he is, he's got to be talking about me. He's got to be talking about me. He said, I'll tell you what I'd do. I would verse 8, let the royal apparel be brought with the king. You know, something you've actually used to wear, but you don't wear anymore, but it's royal apparel. And the crown, I think you should put the crown, the king. You get an idea that Haman has designs on this throne later on in his life? He said, I think you ought to let him wear the crown, and then let his apparel and his horse, the king, horse force one ought to be the one. You put this man on that horse and then parade him up and down the streets of Shushan and say out loud, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. And the king says, Haman, that's a fantastic idea. I want you to take the apparel and the horse, just like you said, and do exactly that to Mordecai the Jew. You know, the one that sits at the king's gate? There are many places in Scripture I would love to have seen a facial expression. This has got to be in my top 3. I would love to see the facial expression of Haman when he's just heard that everything he thinks is going to be happening to him, he's now in charge of leading the parade and promoting and saying, thus it delights the king to honor the man on the horse right now. I don't know how much enthusiasm he put into his voice when he proclaimed it, but Haman then is told, look, you got to hurry to the banquet. There's a banquet waiting on you, and I'll have to close out here and summarize. At this banquet in chapter 7, the king says, all right, what's your petition? And verse 3, Esther the queen says, if I found favor in your sight, O king, if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition and my people at my request. We're sold, I and my people, to be, notice the legal language, to be destroyed, to be slain, to be caused to perish or to perish. You know, if we'd just been sold into slavery, I would have held my tongue, but this is someone trying to kill all of us, and all of my people. The king, who is he and where is he that would dare presume in his heart to do so? And she says, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Facial expression number 2. Wow, this man is cooked. Haman is afraid before the king and the queen. The king gets up from the banquet in his wrath, and he goes out into the palace garden to try to cool off. Haman grabs a hold of Esther, begging and pleading for his life, and at that moment the king walks in and he says, what, are you going to try to force the queen also? You're going to try to physically, sexually assault her in my house? And the word went out of the king's mouth, and they covered Haman's face, and the next thing you know, he's hanging on a gallows. As we close, what's Esther's impact? Her brave, selfless leadership led to another decree. She couldn't get the law that had already been made to be reversed because the Persian law was irreversible, but she did get another decree passed that says you have every right to defend yourself when they try to cause you to be slain or to perish. And so you can defend yourself. And when you read chapters 8, 9, and 10, you see the Jews going from fasting to feasting. They win victorious by the providence of God. They're preserved. And Esther has taken it upon herself to do what she did. And certainly Judah still existed, and the Savior came from Judah. What an impact Esther made. Now, you and I, can we make an impact in our world around us? We can. We just need to be humble, strong, trusting, faithful, bold, and brave. May God help us do that.